monsters, madness, and magic.
All right, folks, welcome to the Monsters, Madness, and Magic podcast. I'm your host, Justin, here with a quick word before we dive in. Now, in this episode, I chat with actor and comedian Larry Brantley about getting his start on the open mic scene in Houston, working as a radio DJ throughout his teenage years, landing the role of a lifetime when he became the voice of Wishbone, the impact of the show on children of the 90s, and more. As always, thank you all for listening out there, and without further ado, here you go. Okay, Larry, take us back in time. You're a youngster. Are you a book reader, fort builder, troublemaker, or all of the above?
Book reader, troublemaker. If I were ever required to build a fort, everyone in my group would be dead. You find people who have those specific skills. I did not, but and I say troublemaker. What I was the class clown. That's what I was. Now some more conservative types, teachers and parents when I was a kid probably that equated that with troublemaker, but I never did.
Right. Funny trouble is usually, that's the okay trouble.
They can't catch you if you're making them laugh.
Right. So you mentioned book reader. Did you have any genres or an author that you leaned towards as a kid?
Man, I was reading pretty early age. I tackled Lord of the Rings when I was 9, I think. So sci-fi fantasy have always been my perennial favorites. But I've also read, I'm a big fan of Hemingway, Cormac McCarthy, just really anything with a compelling story is always something that's drawn me in. I'm currently reading a series by a guy named Matt Denneman. It's called the Dungeon Crawler Carl series.
Oh.
And if you've never checked it out, I recommend it. It's a pretty fun ride.
Fantasy?
It's a mix of sci-fi and fantasy. There's some alien stuff going on in there as well. There's a hodgepodge of things. You'll understand when you hear what the premise is.
Got it. So, being a big reader, did you try your hand at writing early on at all?
I made some halting attempts in had to have been junior high or high school when we were all going through the change at poetry. And we just moved into this house a year ago, December, and during the move, I still had that binder, and it was just utter garbage. Now I got more serious about it as an adult, so I've written a memoir, I've written a screenplay, and I'm maybe halfway through a novel that I occasionally go back to just to see if I can get it going. But I wrote the memoir at a period in my life, starting around 2013, that everything just sort of went to hell real quickly for me. And so writing was the therapy that I could afford.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. And I still keep it up.
It's good for that. Therapy.
Yeah.
So would you say that there was anyone in your family, parents, or, friends that were artistically, creatively inclined? Do you think that's where your roots sort of come from in that regard?
No, I really think it came from being more of a survivor. We moved around a lot when I was a kid, and my mom's parents were immigrants from Ireland. And growing up in their house in Jollyville, Texas, outside of Austin, I learned all about the immigrant experience, which was do whatever you have to do to fit in. Excuse me. And because we moved around a lot, I had to learn to be funny, and I had to learn to be creative. And the way that I made friends was I was the guy who could make you laugh. And so, but no, my father was a blue collar guy. He died when I was pretty young. I was 13. And then my mom was, she was a secretary and a clerk and did all that stuff her whole life. Now, my mom did play piano and sing, so I got my ability to hear harmonies from her. It wasn't anything she taught me. I would just sing with her.
Mm-hmm.
She much preferred that to the other thing I would do with my voice, which was accents and stupid voices all day, every day that would just drive her up a wall.
Early on, you were trying to, do impressions of your favorite actors and such early on.
Oh yeah, I think excuse me, the earliest memory I have of wanting to mimic a voice, I was always kind of a natural mimic. I was real young, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and I used to watch these old black and white Sherlock Holmes movies with this extremely upper crustian British actor called Basil Rathbone. And I just thought it was amazing that, we were both human beings, but we could sound so different from each other. And I just thought it would be fun if I could talk like he talked, right? It was different, it was unique. At least to me it was. So that's when I started it, and I sort of found out that I had an ear for it. And then I just never stopped. I literally never stopped.
So growing up, or maybe even to this day, would you consider yourself a collector of anything, books or comics or anything like that?
I came to the conclusion a long time ago that I suck at collecting things because I'm the kind of person that if I see clutter, it's gotta go. And so I have a very good friend who's a massive collector. He collects comic books and action figures, whiskey bottles, the full ones, not the empty ones. And and he's very meticulous about it. He takes good care of it. I don't have that. I have a lot of books in my library, but I wouldn't say really that I'm a collector of anything. If I'm a collector of anything, it's of people's stories.
Mm.
And the main reason for that is I can just house them in my brain, and I don't have to put them on a shelf, and I can sort of access the Rolodex whenever I want. Although at my age, it becomes more and more difficult to access the entire Rolodex.
So, you mentioned Sherlock Holmes, but when you think back to other formative films and TV shows that you grew up on personally, what comes to mind?
Man, I was a child of the 70s. I was raised on television. So we were just on my podcast, Nerd Herfers, we were literally just talking about this the other day. We were talking about TV shows we loved as kids, but did not hold up as adults. Hint, any show by Sid and Marty Krofft in the 1970s. But back then I was like I said, like action and science fiction. So like the $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, Wonder Woman. I mean, Linda Carter got me through some difficult times as a child. I think she did for a lot of us. So I was watching TV all the time. Of course, I was definitely watching Saturday morning cartoons back when that was a thing. I mean, I would literally get up at 5:30 in the morning. I think the first block was like old Tex Avery cartoons, and then it would go into Looney Tunes, and then it would go into probably a Sid and Marty Krofft show, and you could literally sit in front of the TV with your sugar cereal and not move till lunchtime. It was great. So yeah, I watched a ton of television. Undoubtedly, it's impacted me probably in several negative ways, but it did sort of plant the seed for what I eventually wound up doing with my career.
Right. And I'm a child of the late 80s, early 90s, but I was raised by my grandparents. So I grew up on old recorded VHS tapes of Sanford and Son and,
Oh yeah,
Archie Bunker, All in the Family. And
yeah.
those are just things that would not fly today, but I still think it's some of the best TV that.
I think and it still is some of the best. And to me, that stuff actually holds up. Norman Lear was way ahead of his time, man, because that guy was writing about social issues and doing comedy with it before like everybody else wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, and he wasn't afraid to do it. So yeah, that was fun to watch. But you're right, man. That stuff could never get made today.
Right. So would you say that going to the movie theater was a big deal for you growing up? Were you hanging out in the movie theaters?
Yeah, it was. That came a little later, but like the biggest memory I have, the most important, I mean, in terms of my love of movies, and I do love movies. So I'm a bit of an introvert. You might know that from the fact that I, for a living, just stand in a box behind a microphone with nobody else. Um, but my favorite thing to do is go up on my balcony, sit down with some whiskey, and just watch old movies. I can do that any evening, whenever I want. There's never a time when I'm like, I don't want to do that. I always want to do that. I have to make time for other things. But it was May of 1977, and my friend Steve and I conned my parents into taking us to the Greenspoint Mall movie theater that was in Houston, Texas. And we told them that we were going to see a Benji movie. We were actually planning to sneak in to see a movie called The Deep with Jacqueline Bisset and Nick Nolte because it was rated R and because some of our friends had told us that Jacqueline Bisset in one scene has a wet t-shirt and nothing on underneath it. And so like to, an 11-year-old boy, that was like, we're doing that. So we're walking in and we're sneaking our way out. And over here, there was another theater doors were open. And I looked and I saw a spaceship being chased by a much larger spaceship. And quite without thinking about it, I totally abandoned Steve. I walked down. I think the front row of the theater was the only thing that had any seats available. I sat down and I watched Star Wars: A New Hope for the very first time. And after the movie was over, I went out into the lobby. There was Steve. He was like, "What happened to you?" I told him, and then I said, "We're going back in to watch this movie." We watched it two more times that day.
Mm.
Now, the lesson there is not Larry developed his love of movies and going to the theater at that point. The lesson was at no point did any adult come looking for us because our parents remembered that we were not back at the house. They, I think I finally used some change and called them on a payphone to go, "Hey, you can come pick us up now." It was like 10 o'clock at night. But that was a big one for me. And so, yeah, going to the movies was always an exciting time. It was always a social event for me. It still is. I love going to the films with my kids. They're all grown now and don't live in Texas anymore. Well, my son does. He just came back. But when they were younger and we would go to the movies together, that was super fun. And it was sort of like passing that love on.
Yeah. Uh, Similar to you, my dad saw Star Wars early on. So when I was, I don't know, I must have been 10 or 11 when the Phantom Menace came out.
Oh
So,
yeah.
so I had that version of Star Wars experience.
Yeah, that
But
was your generation. That was Lucas's whole point. He was like, I wanted to create Star Wars for a new generation.
yeah, but when I look back on it, I was a Star Wars fan as a kid, but the
Mhm.
Phantom Menace is not the new A New Hope. You know what I mean?
I absolutely know what you mean.
Yeah.
I absolutely know what you mean. Well, and I think I recently saw an interview with Ewan McGregor where he was talking about that. He said, "Look, we knew that. I mean, they got a star-studded cast and whatever." He goes, but he goes, "We knew from day one that we were not the stars of the film. There was all this new technology that Lucas didn't have to play with when he made the first three films, and that became the star of the show. And for better or worse, that's what happened.
Yeah.
And but there it is. It's still fun to go watch it on the big screen."
Yeah, it is for sure. Uh, so just sticking with your childhood for a bit, which records were spinning around the house when you were growing up?
Oh my gosh, man. My mom listened to a lot of like old traditional country, so Conway Twitty and Buck Owens and Loretta Lynn and Tammy Wynette. And there were parts of that I enjoyed, but I discovered rock and roll on my own early. And the first 45 I ever owned was an instrumental by the Edgar Winter group called Frankenstein. And I wanted that thing so bad, I traded it uh, with a buddy of mine who had it, and I could only listen to it at his house. And I told him I would trade him my Evil Knievel stunt cycle for that 45.
Oh shit.
And I did, and I still don't regret it because my friend who I told you is a collector was like, that thing would be worth so much money today. I'm like, yeah, but it's not Edgar Winter, man. It's I
Yeah.
like once I got that 45, that was it for me. I was buying vinyl. That I mean that was young. But we got an allowance as kids. We did chores around the house. Every chance I had to go to the record store, man, we went to the record store. So I would listen to the radio and I would find a song and I would love it and I'd figure out, we had no internet to tell us. So if the DJ didn't mention the name of the song and who the artist was, you kind of had to wait for it to come around in the rotation again. But I started collecting albums when I was probably 12.
Mm.
And at one point I had upwards of 500 of them.
So you did collect.
Well, you know what? Yeah, I guess technically that I had a record collection for sure. But unlike some guys that are very serious collectors, I played my records.
Yeah, yeah.
And unfortunately, when I went off to the army, um, I think it was my second week of basic training. We were allowed to call home for 10 minutes on a Sunday. I called home and my mom had to inform me that a water main had busted underneath the house, right under my bedroom, which is where my boxes of records were kept. And
Shit.
so the whole collection was ruined.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I went into a deep, deep period of mourning. But it's funny, it comes back around now because my daughter loves vinyl, you know,
Yeah.
and, and she'll we up here where I live, we've got a mom and pop record shop, a real record shop that does buy sell trade, and it's fun to go in there with her when she comes to town and check out discs.
I can totally relate. Once you amass a collection of something you love like that and you lose it, it's hard to start over because I was a big VHS tape collector and I
Okay.
inherited my dad's. Literally, we had pages like a library catalog, and you had to look up where the movie was and then go to the library shelves to find it. And we were in the middle of moving houses, and so we were going to leave the VHS tapes at my aunt's house. And now no one got injured, but while she was out, the house burnt down.
Oh man.
So she lost everything. We
Oh,
lost. It was horrible. But so
oh.
yeah, I still haven't been able to start start collecting the old VHS again, which is probably a little outdated now, but they're coming back.
I kid you not. I know guys who still have them.
Yeah, they really are making a
I've got
comeback.
some tech head friends that just like every. I mean, I got one buddy that still has his Commodore 64, man. You
Yeah,
know.
retro tech is coming back. So did you ever pick up an instrument, or was it just love listening to music?
I started teaching myself how to play guitar when I was 40.
Mm.
And my first guitar, I've only ever played acoustic guitar because it was the only ever guitar that I wanted to play. But uh, and then I picked up a second a few years later, a Taylor 616 CE, just still my favorite guitar to this day. Unfortunately, a couple 3 years ago, I started to develop arthritis in my hands.
Uh,
And so now I can't really play with any longevity anymore. I can pick up and poke around for a few minutes, but my hands give out because I had a band. This was just a few years ago. It was a three-piece band, and we were mostly known for covering songs by bands that nobody had ever heard of. So there was a lot of Americana, roots, bluegrass, and blues. And the three of us, Shelby Smith was my upright bass player, and then Jan Touchberry was our other vocalist. And we just had really good harmony together. We sung together for a long time. And so I missed that because we used to play gigs, local gigs around. We'd play at restaurants and wine bars and stuff like that. And because we didn't have a lot of gear, we were easy to travel. People came to see us because of the way our voices sounded, not necessarily because I was a kick-ass guitarist. I never was. Um, but it was a lot of fun, and that I miss actually more than just playing guitar. I miss making music with my friends.
yeah,
I'm a
that's what it's about.
collaborator when it comes down to it, except for writing. I'm a collaborator artistically. Like that's why I love making television shows and making movies, and because I do love collaboration.
Clearly, you love music. Were you a big concert goer?
Oh man, that's all I spent my money on in high school.
Mm.
I held down two jobs in high school to pay for concert tickets, concert t-shirts, and gas to get me to concerts. So that, I mean, seriously, that was me and my two best friends, Jeffrey Moore and Doug Monique. We went to every concert we could possibly go to, and in the '80s, that was a lot. There was a lot of there was a big venue downtown Houston called the Summit, and that is mostly where we went to see those shows.
What are some of your highlights, live
Oh
bands
man.
you've seen?
I mean, we saw everybody from like Judas Priest.
Ooh, yes.
We saw Iron Maiden.
Ooh.
We saw ZZ Top and Joan Jett and the Blackhearts open for them. We saw Yes on the 90125 tour. Um, we saw, oh God, REO Speedwagon. We saw Survivor. We saw Zebra. Um, I mean, if there was a rock band in the 80s and they came to Houston, we probably saw them. I even went to, there used to be a thing called the Texas World Music Festival. They just called it the Texas Jam, and it was at the Astrodome in Houston, Texas. They called it the eighth wonder of the world. It is not. It's a giant dome that's just concrete with no good air scrubbers. But that was a concert. That must have been like 82. So that concert had Point Blank, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, Sammy Hagar before he joined Van Halen, Santana, and Journey.
You've seen them all, man.
Original lineup. So we went to concerts all the time.
I knew my wife was the one when we were dating, and it was our 1 year anniversary, and she got us tickets to the Iron Maiden Book of Souls tour. And I was
Nice.
like, oh, I guess we're getting married now.
Huh. Yeah. Should I propose now or after the concert? That's fantastic.
So, this is a question I like to ask everybody, and take it whichever direction you want to go with it. Is what scared you as a kid?
Oh man, that's an interesting question. I am not trying to humble brag here, but there was very little that scared me as a kid because I had such an overactive imagination that I felt like there was nothing in the world that could be worse than what I could cook up in my head. Now, not to bring the conversation down too much, but my father committed suicide when I was 13 years old, and as 13 years old, that's about losing a parent like that is about the worst thing that can ever happen to you. And I
Yeah,
thought, okay, if I can survive that, then there's really not a whole lot that's going to scare me,
yeah.
there really hasn't been. Now I became fearful when I became a parent. I'll tell you that right now. The second I laid eyes on my newborn daughter, I was like, holy shit, I'm in charge of another human being. That was genuinely terrifying. But I got some great advice from a friend of mine who already had two kids at the time. She said, two things you need to remember. Number one, your only job for the first year is to keep the baby alive. And number two, as it turns out, babies are surprisingly hard to kill.
Good, good.
So yeah, so that it all worked out. And and they're great now. They're grown up and they're mostly well-adjusted human beings. And but yeah, the early part of parenthood, that was what scared me. Nothing prepares you for it. Um, Nothing prepares you for it. But it's a pretty fun ride.
This is
I used to
hit.
have black hair.
This is hitting home right now because I don't have kids, but my wife and I are trying, and of course I'm excited. But just like you say, there's that. I'm an idiot. What am I going to do? So I'm at this.
Oh,
I'm at.
dude, you're gonna find out how much of an idiot you actually are, and I mean that in the most loving way possible.
Yeah.
You are going to do things and just think, why? Why did I make that choice? Like my ex-wife, I'm remarried. My ex-wife and I, my daughter's mom, we were researchers and readers, right? So prior to the birth, we had collected all the books. We had collected a library, what to expect when you're expecting, and everything up through like the first 5 or 6 years of life. And within 24 hours of bringing my daughter home, I took every single one of those books off the shelf, took them outside, and burned them
Oh man.
because I was like, you all are just that was just a whole lot of money wasted on bullshit. Just don't kill the baby. That's all you got to do. Just don't kill the baby.
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah,
Uh,
but it's been great though. I highly recommend being a parent. It's pretty awesome.
I was at the grocery store shopping, and I I was texting my wife. You need anything? I'm at the store right now, and all she says is, "Yeah, get a pregnancy test." So I'm just standing in the middle of the aisle, like just
Oh,
just having an existential crisis in the middle
yeah,
of the grocery store.
yeah.
Just like, what's going on?
Well, I mean, that is the place to have an existential crisis because you usually have some soft rock playing lightly in the background.
Yeah.
Like you've never felt more out of touch with reality in your life. Usually in the frozen food section for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Just weird.
So, if you don't mind me asking, what was the catalyst for joining the army?
I really needed to get out of my small town in Texas.
Yeah, that'll do it.
My mom had remarried. My mom's passed away. I know she wouldn't mind me telling the story, but her reaction to my father's suicide was to become an alcoholic, and she was an alcoholic for many, many years. Now, thankfully, she got clean and sober after about 20 something years. But her health was never the same after that. It had done its work. But I did not get along with her new husband at all. And I knew that it was just a matter of time. And so I had the presence of, couldn't afford to go to college. That would have been a great out, but we literally, I grew up poor. And so I was like, well, I can join the army and they will feed me and house me and teach me stuff. And as it turns out, I have no regrets whatsoever about joining the army because I did learn a lot about myself, far more than I think I could have if I had stayed in my small town and tried to make a living.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that completely. So, what was the initial interest in stand up? Well, clearly you were doing impressions as a kid. Was that always there?
I love stand-up comedy. I've always loved stand-up comedy. And in my small town of Conroe, Texas, where I was going to school at the time, um, it was a very small town and very conservative. And and I was listening to guys like Richard Pryor and Robin Williams and Sam Kinison. And my mom had no idea that I had these albums because I would listen to them in my room with my headphones on, right? And then I would go and I would do a lot of the bits at school, right? And they would get laughs. And so I thought, okay, now what if I basically did the same thing, but I created my own persona and wrote my own stuff? Could I do that? And my mom was friends with a guy who knew another guy who ran a comedy club in Houston and started with a couple of open mic nights. Everybody gets like 5 minutes, whatever. Now I had to lie about my age. I had to tell them I was 18, I was 16. But I had this awesome porn stash, this pencil thin porn stash. So it kind of made me look a little bit older. And from there, I actually wound up doing actual sets. I opened for regional Texas comics, guys with names like Jimmy Pineapple and Conrad Lawrence, and funny, funny guys. However, I did stand up for 2 almost 3 years while I was in high school, and I made a mental note to myself that I was not going to continue to do that when I graduated high school. I was because I really wanted to get out of my town, but also because Conrad and Jimmy and all those guys had told me horrible stories about life when you're trying to make it as a stand-up comic and you haven't broken out yet because you haven't gotten your cable special or you haven't gotten that sitcom to go. And so, like, Jimmy would tell me stories about sleeping in his car in between gigs. And I think the guy, when I met him, I would have been like 16 or 17. He had to have been 30. He'd already been married and divorced like 3 times. I was like, well, you're getting up into Elizabeth Taylor country, buddy. You better be careful. But it wasn't the life I imagined that it was.
Yeah.
So I stopped doing it then. And of course, I told no jokes when I was in the army because they don't like that. Um, but then when I got out, several years later, I I started doing open mics again, and I will occasionally go and do a set. I'm friends with the guy at the local comedy club. Sometimes he'll call me in to do a set. Um, I've done some improv, that kind of thing, but I just love stand-up comedy. I think it's a great storytelling art form. I think it is extremely hard to do well. And I think the men and women who do it the best make it look effortless. And unfortunately, what that does for the public is make them think they can be funny too.
Yes. Yes.
So you've got those guys that like, I should do stand-up comedy. My friends tell me I'm hysterical. I was like, that's because they're your friends and they like you, buddy. Get in front of a room full of strangers. And back in the 80s, when I was doing it as a kid, they did not help you with hecklers. If a heckler started on you and you couldn't defend yourself, they would let you crash and burn on that stage.
Yeah,
Nowadays, they'll walk a heckler out if they're getting too vociferous. But back then, man, it was like, you're the Christian, those are the lions, let's see what happens.
exactly. I love stand up as well. My high school yearbook quote is a Mitch Hedberg quote. So that if people ever look back through it, that's my legacy is some silly Mitch Hedberg quote. I think it's the I ordered
Which one? There were so many of them.
yeah, I ordered the club sandwich. I don't know how I get away with it, but I'm not even a member.
I don't know how I get away with it, man. I'm not even a member. That's a good one.
So how did your first time on stage doing stand up go? Was it smooth? Did you bomb?
I was terrified. Now, the very first time I was on stage at 16, I basically I stole from every one of my favorite comics. I didn't have a single piece of original material. But I was also ad-libbing a lot because I discovered that um, if I could, this sounds weird, but if I could take the focus off of me and put it on an audience member and then get people to laugh at them because of something that I said or did, that worked out pretty well for me. Um, but I had my share of bombs. I mean, especially when I started writing original material,
Hmm.
and you write it in a vacuum, and you think it's the best thing ever, and then the only way to try it out is to, because what am I going to do? I could A lot of these jokes I could not tell in front of my mom. Um, you have to go and get yourself in front of a crowd, and you find out real quickly if it's fun or not.
So does radio come before or after the army for you?
I was a radio DJ while I was still in high school.
Wow.
Yeah, I worked at an AM radio station called KMUV, and I mean it was an easy job. I think the owner of the station basically hired me as a favor to my mom, but when he found out I could actually do it, then I started to get, more hours and more shifts, and worked with some, pretty cool people, and learned very quickly where the phrase "you've got a great face for radio" came from. Uh, I'm not kidding, man. We had one guy that he would just roll into the studio in his pajamas. They looked to be the same pajamas all the time. I'm not sure he ever washed them. But he was like a nighttime DJ, but he was damn good. He was super smooth, and nobody cared what he looked like.
No Zoom.
Yeah, so I did that through high school.
That's cool, man. See, that's just something I've always sort of romanticized in my head as a kid because I listened to a lot of radio growing up, just listening to songs or even stuff like Coast to Coast. I was a big Coast to
Mhm.
Coast fan growing up. So, what would you say are some of the difficult aspects of doing radio that we might not consider something that's kind of under the radar?
Well, I mean, the thing you have to remember is that it's so different now.
Yeah.
It's completely different now. So back then, radio was a super strong medium, and and we were just a local AM radio station. I mean, the amount of hertz that we put out probably wouldn't reach past the end of my neighborhood, right? Um, and it was all pre-programmed, right? So all the music was on reel to reel. It was all A&R, and so we had certain reels that we could choose from, depending on the hour of the day, and then you had to get a certain number of ads in because people paid for those. And I also got my first experience doing audio production because a lot of times a client would come in with an idea for a radio ad, and they would just want us to write it and produce it.
Mm.
And so, it'd be like a local company, or it'd be like a promo that they were doing or whatever. And I remember around a Christmas time one year, it must have been like 83 or 84 maybe. Um, they wanted a Christmas ad. And so I got the idea from another DJ to get everybody in the station in and record them as elves. And then we played it back super speed. So
Yeah.
their voices went up. And so, like, you had to learn how to work with what you had. Um, you really have to be, at least back then, Nowadays, you probably got, things like your phone and every other reminder on your screens if you're doing radio stuff. But if you had to take a bathroom break, you're on live. You're live on the air. If you had to take a bathroom break, you better make sure you're putting on like Peter Frampton or, Inagata Devita or something, so you have time to go take care of your business. Because if the song runs out and you're not at the board, it's just dead air, and that is, the bane of every radio DJ everywhere. But again, it's just so different now. Like I don't listen to the radio in my car.
No.
I will listen occasionally to NPR. They still have some great shows, but I don't listen to local radio stations. I mean, I've got this attached to my car, and I've got every song that was ever created, ever written, ever performed on this thing. And, if you had told me that in 1984, I would have told you were smoking the wrong shit.
Yeah, yeah. That's something I've experienced in my lifetime is the death of the radio personality. There'll never be any more. It's all podcasts and stuff now.
Yeah.
There'll never be a Casey Kasem or someone like Howard Stern in the '90s. It's just you got to have a podcast.
Well, and look at that. Look at you.
If you said it's not a big radio station, but still, you're on your own live air. There are some people out there listening. Would you say that helped you sort of in the comedy realm, like just being on stage and working on your voice or anything like that?
It was just another form of live performance for me.
Yeah.
And so it was different. I would often say what I thought were funny things on station breaks when I was, when the mic was open and I was talking to the audience. I don't know if anybody ever laughed, because that's the problem of being a radio disc jockey, is that there's nobody in there with you. And so, but yeah, a lot of my friends' parents did listen to the station because it played the kind of music that they liked. And so, like, I would often get requests I remember this one time, this is a true story. There was this girl, and I was in love with this girl. We'd been friends in high school, and she was a cheerleader. But I was like firmly relegated to the friend zone. And the phone rang, and I picked it up, and I'm like, "You're on the move with KMUV." And this voice goes, "Larry." And I was like, "It's her." And I'm like, "Why would she be called? Like, are you listening to this thing right now, to this thing?" She goes, "Oh, my mom and dad think the music is great and they want to hear this song." She just called to request the song. And I was like, and I probably had half a dozen requests in front of her. That was the next song that got played.
Hey, being a DJ has its perks.
Right?
So, where does the interest in acting arise? Are you doing local theater early on? Like, when do you jump into that?
I really never did. I did a little bit of theater when I was in high school, and I didn't do it as part of the high school theater group. In high school, excuse me. In high school, I was on the speech and debate team. And so we had events called competitive interpretations. So there were three categories of competitive interpretations. You could do a humorous interpretation, a dramatic interpretation, or a duet. And that could be funny or sad or tragic, whatever. And so that was where I did it. And the reason that I did that instead of doing theater is because I have always been the kind of person that will deliberately try to make things harder than they need to be. And in interpretation, when you go to a competition, you are standing, you go to a school, a rival school, and you are standing in a classroom. It's on the weekend, so, and the only other people in the room are your fellow competitors in that round and the judges. And you have to, within 10 minutes, create a convincing character, tell a story. You don't have props, you don't have costume or wardrobe, you don't have lights, you don't have music. It's just you performing for this very, very tiny audience. And most of that audience is hostile because they're your competitors,
Yeah.
right? And so you have to either make them laugh or make them cry, or you have to evoke emotion, right? So that's where it kind of started for me. And I again, it was mostly about trying to make people laugh. I forever and ever am always trying to make people laugh. So my strong point was humorous interpretation. I did do some duets. I did dramatic once in a while, but that's sort of where that was the acting that I did
Yeah. So
early on.
I have to ask because you know, we don't just do horror, but we are horror leaning. And it
Yeah.
says in your bio that you were in a production of Dracula. What's the story there?
That was actually a theater production. The director was a man named Cabot Parsons, who I've not been in touch with for years and years. But it was a very surreal uh, performance of Dracula, and I played Jonathan Hart. So I wasn't Dracula. So I think I get killed fairly early on in the thing. Um, but then I would come back later as a ghost. It was weird. I had to have my shirt off, which was uncomfortable. Um, but yeah, that was my that was one of my very few forays into theater.
How old were you?
Oh gosh, 17.
Oh, so it was young, young. Okay,
Mhm.
you were still a
Yeah,
teenager.
again, this is still high school days.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So was Wishbone your first professional acting gig?
If you discount all the commercials that I did prior to Wishbone, yes, but I had done a lot of on-camera commercials. So I moved to Dallas from the Houston area in 1993 with a friend of mine, and we met up with a third friend. And the plan was we came to Dallas for a very specific reason. We knew that Dallas was a big marketing and advertising area. So at the time, three of the five biggest ad agencies in the country had offices in Dallas. So there was a lot of commercial production going on here. And of course, there were a lot of big um, corporations that would do industrial training videos, and they needed actors for that. And so our plan was in 1993 to move up to Dallas and to take 2 years and to build up our resume. I'd do some more stand up, but you get an agent, start getting acting jobs, get them on your resume, build up your chops, take some acting classes, all that. Um, and within the first 6 months that I was here, my agent sent me on an audition, and it was a voice audition, and it turned out to be Wishbone.
Wow.
And I had no idea at the time that it was going to turn into the sort of cultural phenomenon that it became.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because just speaking for myself, I put Wishbone in the same category as stuff like Mr. Rogers,
Oh
Sesame
man,
Street. It
thank
just fostering, young kids to read and
you. Mhm.
even like you did the classics, like the Sleepy Hollow episode. I vividly remember that. It was just very
Yeah.
formative. When did you have that realization that this is bigger than I realized?
It was after we wrapped on the first season of production, and Rick Duffield, the executive producer and creator of the show, called me and said, "We are sending." So Jackie Captain was the head animal trainer, and she owned Wishbone, whose real name was Soccer. She said, "We're sending Jackie and Soccer on the road. We're going to send them to most major PBS markets. They're going to do interviews, they're going to do live appearances, and we want you as one half of Wishbone to go with them. And, do what you do, entertain the crowd, do the voice. We called it our dog and pony show. And it was when we started going out into the world and meeting these crowds that we started to get an understanding because, excuse me, we went everywhere. We were in San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Boston, New York, Houston, Dallas, just everywhere. I think the first public appearance we did was in Atlanta, Georgia, on the day that the show premiered. But after the show had been out for a while and we started doing this dog and pony show, we'd roll up and there would be hundreds and hundreds of people just waiting for a chance to see the dog, you know. And I very clearly remember we made an appearance at the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it's a huge sprawling complex. And we were back in the green room, and we were going to appear in this area called the Rotunda. And we're back there, and it was me, Jackie Soccer. Now there were a couple of the other actors from the show. Mary Chris Wall, who played Ellen Talbot, was there, and Angie Hughes, who played the neighbor Wanda, was there. And then the head of security of the Mall of America walked in, and he said, "Hey, interesting fact, you guys just broke the attendance record for Planet Hollywood, for the Planet Hollywood opening."
Wow.
And I said, "How many people were at the Planet Hollywood opening?" He said, "About 5,000." And I said, "If you had to guess right now, how many people are out there?" And he said, "Well, we use counters, so we're pretty accurate. We're just around 7,000 people out there." And I
Wow.
swear I thought Jackie was going to pick the dog up and run out of the building. But that was when, and I would take all these stories from the road and come back and tell Rick Duffield, my boss. I would say, "This is what's happening right now," because we discovered that we weren't just popular with little kids. In Boston, I met a whole group of college students from Harvard and MIT and Boston College that were standing in line to get their picture taken with the dog.
Yeah.
So we learned eventually that we were popular sort of across the board. It wasn't just little kids and their parents who were watching the show. A lot of people were tuning in.
Yeah, my wife even said, when he comes in, you should act surprised that he isn't a dog. I'm like, he probably gets that way too often.
You have no idea. I was expecting someone shorter and furrier without thumbs. Well, sorry to disappoint.
And I can just say, from, teasing the episode of my own audience, and, I had Daniel Stern on and Michael Ironside, but the DMs that I got from the voice of Wishbone were like triple that. And it's just like crazy that it's still out there.
That's awesome, man. That really is. That makes me feel good. It's amazing to me how many times people will reach out and just say things like, "Now, I stayed away from cons for a really long time because of my twin dislikes of crowds and people, but uh, I started doing cons about 2 years ago, and it is amazing to me. The overwhelming reason people come up and talk to me is because of Wishbone. It's still out there, and I've had people bring, old Wishbone books that they wanted me to sign for them. Some of them have original plushes still in the box. It's crazy. And to hear someone say to you, "You were the voice of my childhood," I
You are
take
for a
that
lot of people,
very,
man.
I take that very seriously. Like that first time someone said that to me, I got a little teary. I was trying to be cool, but I was like, "I'm not being cool right now." Wow, well, how do you respond to that? How do you respond to that? So I just went, "Thank you. Take a picture."
Has anyone ever asked you to sign their terrier?
I've never had that. No one has ever brought a live dog. And I like to think we have the kind of audience that would never do that,
Me
but
too.
it's hard to tell, man. It's hard to tell. But no, I've never signed a dog.
So with the actual voice of Wishbone, was there a lot of back and forth of, little this, little that, or did you just nail it initially?
So when I did the first audition, I actually didn't know what the show was. I knew the dog was there was a dog, and he's the star of the show, and I knew that I was going to be voicing the dog, but I didn't know if it was a live action show, if it was an animated show. Here's the thought: as I was driving to the first audition, here was the thought that I almost turned the car around and drove away. At the time, 1993, the biggest kids show on the planet was called Barney and Friends. And I thought, if I get this gig, am I going to have to dress up in a dog costume and dance around? I'll do it for the right amount of money. I'll probably end up a drug addict and an alcoholic, but I'll do it for the right amount of money. So at the first audition, they basically just gave us copy to read and no context whatsoever. It wasn't until I got to what they call the callback, which is the second audition. Now they've pared it down to several other people. At the callback, we met Soccer for the first time, and I was like, "How is this going to work? Holy crap." So But during that audition process, I wasn't in a booth. I was standing in a room, and Jackie Captain, the dog trainer, was there with Soccer, and they recorded me on a boom box. And basically, they said, "Well, we're going to give you this copy to read, and Jackie's going to put the dog through some behaviors, and you talk to that." And I was like, "That doesn't sound fun." But I got lucky, really lucky, because right at that moment, Jackie looked to the producers and the directors and the head writer and said, "Hey, Soccer needs a break." And I thought that meant he needed to go outside. But what she did was she took out a little rubber soccer ball, and she tossed it to him. And he lost his freaking mind. And he just started playing a game of catch with himself right there in the study. And quite without thinking about it, I laid the copy down, and I just right then started vocalizing what I thought must be going through his head in that moment. And the voice just, and there wasn't ever really any affectation to the voice. It was just me. It was 22-year-old me, or 21, 23, 4-year-old me. And so it was less about finding a voice and more about finding the dog's personality. And that's exactly, I mean, they told me hands down. It was still several more weeks before somebody told me I had the gig. But when I got to the studio for the first day for a table read, that was the first thing they said to me. They said, "We had guys coming in here that were very serious, had really experienced voice actors. I was a dumb kid." They said they were all trying to do a voice, and what we really wanted was the personality of the dog, and you nailed it. And so that's how I got the job.
Yeah, and when I look at it, Wishbone was from 95 to 97. 50 episodes is a lot. It's a lot of episodes. But I remember it being so popular. What was the reason behind the eventual cancellation? Was it just maybe the age of the dog or something along those lines?
No, no, not at all. Because, we were thinking ahead. To be perfectly honest with you, most of us would have happily worked on that show for the rest of our careers. We were never going to run out of source material. Um, so it wasn't anything like that. What had happened at the end of at the in the late 90s, television was changing. Um, Technology was emerging that was making it cheaper to do shows, faster to turn those shows around and get them on the air. And that's what networks were starting to demand. Um, you have to remember that we shot our show as a movie. We shot it on 16 millimeter film. We had to turn the world around every single week. One half of the universe of that show would be in a different period of time. And so we had, a crew of over 200 working nonstop to make that happen every single week that we turned out an episode. We had an original score to go with every episode. We had visual effects to go with every episode. So we were literally making a mini movie with every single episode, because Rick had said early on that he wanted it to feel cinematic. He wanted to give kids the experience that every time they sat down to watch a Wishbone movie, they were watching a movie.
Right.
And what we tried and failed to do with PBS is we tried to convince them early on that this should not be a daily show. It should be a weekly show. It should be what was then called, excuse me, appointment viewing, meaning that kids would take one look at this show and then they would just sit on the edge of their seat until the next week when a new episode dropped.
Right.
What that would have done for us is, number one, it would have given us much more time to plan ahead for the next season and the next season. It also would have given the people whose jobs it was to make money from our show a chance to merchandise and license. But unfortunately, network television in the late 90s was very, very impatient. We want it now, now, now. We want it cheap, cheap, cheap. And that was not ever something we were going to be able to do with this show and maintain its integrity. So the industry just sort of left us behind, if you will. And we did 50 episodes and a TV movie for Showtime called Dog Days of the West. And it was, as Angie Hughes once said in an interview, it was a show whose time had come. And I seriously, and I've never seen anything that even remotely compares to it today.
No, there's
So
not.
and I'm not, again, sounds like a huge brag, but it's really not, because I'm talking about the effort and intent and integrity that went into a show like that. Um, I mean, I'm still friends with most of the people that worked on that show, and they will tell you, to a man and woman, it was the best thing they ever worked on. And we were all super young and at the beginning of our careers. And most of us have stayed in the business to one degree or another. Every one of them will tell you it was the best thing. It was the right people at the right time under the right circumstances. It was stressful. We were working 5, sometimes 6 days a week. We were, not, I was newly married at the time. I hardly ever saw my wife, but we all kind of realized super early on that this was going to be different.
Yeah.
And none of us were prepared to phone it in. Every one of us wanted to give it everything we had all the time. And I think it shows.
Yeah. Just speaking to you saying how fulfilling it was. I mean, you're teaching kids, well, not just kids, obviously adults are watching it, but storytelling and reading doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah. There's a great story that Rick Duffield told me once. This was after the show had been out for about a year, and he was invited to speak at Southern Methodist University at a symposium on the state of television and storytelling and all this stuff. And it was at the Greer Garson Theater. And he was actually the guy who was going last. He was going to speak last. And I think he said there were maybe, 200 some odd students in the room, maybe more. And about halfway through his talk, half of them got up and walked out. And he finished his talk, and then he looked at the moderator and he goes, "Did I say something offensive? Did I do something wrong?" And the guy goes, he looked at his watch and he goes, "Oh no, they went back to their dorm rooms to watch your show."
That's great.
It's 3:30 in the afternoon. They just went to go watch Wishbone.
So, the cat Salem on Sabrina the Teenage Witch was an animatronic, but Nick Bakay said that he would be on set voicing it live, sort of off to the side. Now, were you doing something similar to that, or were you just
Yeah,
essentially dubbing it?
so we decided that at the very first table read. Um, I was invited to the table read. Now, keep in mind, the only voice work I've done so far in my career is, by myself in a booth with nothing else going on. But as I was reading with all of the other actors, and so we had the contemporary actors there, so the kids and the adults, and then we had the fantasy actors that were going to be doing that first script we did was Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist. And it became real apparent real quick that the actors wanted to have me there. They wanted to actually have my voice and my personality to act with, as opposed to a script supervisor who would just feed them lines, right? And so, after that table read, Rick Duffield and our line producer Betty Buckley came up to me and said, "Well, here's what we're thinking. We want to have you on set for principal photography." And I was like, "Yeah, I literally will do anything you want." I was like, "That's my first TV show. Anything." So I did. And so we had a wonderful sound guy by the name of Michael Haynes, and he had to figure out how to put me on set with the other actors without me physically being on set. And so what he did was he took a speaker and he ran it out and he ran back, and I would stand with him by the sound equipment. And then he would give me a high 8 monitor so that I could see what the camera shot, and a microphone. And then a Comtech, which is just like little Walkman headphones, but it picks up what the boom mic is doing. And so I could communicate with the actors and I could act with them. So that's how we did every single episode.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
we were talking earlier about your love of music. You obviously played in your own band, had records, go to concerts. When I speak with actors who have done a lot of voice work, specifically like dubbing and anime, they say it's almost a musical skill, and if you have some musical chops, that it'll help you sort of find your footing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, particularly with anime, where there's definitely a rhythm to. Now, I had a curveball thrown to me 2 weeks ago because I'm currently voicing a new anime. I can't say what it is, but it's a Chinese production and it's also 3D animation. And so the mouth movement is very, very specific. So in traditional Japanese 2D anime, we call that mouth flaps, right? And you just basically have to find the rhythm that the English words go with the mouth flaps. And that's what you have great audio engineers for. That is their whole, I mean, God, I would fail miserably without my audio engineers. I love them all. We started doing this Chinese one. And it became very clear to us very quickly. It's a different rhythm. It's like having to learn a new song on the fly because and the mouth is much more specific. And of course, they're speaking a different language than I'm used to voicing. I'm used to dubbing.
Right.
So we had some halting moments on that one, but we figured it out. And yeah, I would say having a little bit of musical background doesn't hurt.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of people say that. So, Larry, what would you say is the best acting advice you've received and who gave it to you?
The best acting advice I ever received and who gave it to me. Oh wow, let me think about that. Um, Man, that's a really good question. I don't know that I've ever been asked this question. Um, you know, the big one, I think, probably uh, came from a guy who wasn't an actor. He was Rick Duffield. He was executive producer and creator of Wishbone. And he wanted to make sure that I never lost the the expressive joy that was such a big part of Wishbone's character. He said, I always want you to think of yourself not as an actor, but put yourself in the dog's fur, if you will, and never lose that sense of joy. He said that's why we cast you, because in that moment where he was just playing around, you captured that exact moment, not with a interesting voice, but with the personality.
Yeah.
So I've never been a I don't I've never really um had a lot of formal training as an actor. I got lucky at the beginning of my career and I just kept going. I've learned a lot of stuff. I've learned from a lot of people. Um, but I think the best advice I ever got was from Rick, and it was just like, don't ever lose that. No matter what you do from here on out, you know, if you can't do it with a certain degree of joy, should you really be doing it? And that really applies to anything.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty damn sound advice, and I've done my best. I don't always do it correctly, but I've tried.
This is a question I like to ask everyone at the end. Have you ever had an experience you would consider supernatural, paranormal, or encountered an event you can't explain?
Um, the only thing I can't explain is why my second wife agreed to marry me. She like, you when you hit the lottery, you know it. And so yeah, that one I still don't have a I mean, yeah, I'm funny, but really we're both in middle age. It's like there's got to be more to it than that. So yeah, I don't know. No, I never like I was always the skeptic when I was a kid. And so now don't get me wrong. When I go to the theater or I sit in front of the television or I open a book or listen to an audiobook, I am 100% prepared to suspend my disbelief. Even after all these years of being in the industry, I still actually find that very easy to do. I don't sit there. I have some friends that have been in the business as long as I have, and they just pick shows apart. They are no fun to watch stuff with. And it's not their fault. That's just how their brain works, right?
Yeah.
I am able to completely shut that down and just be a spectator and enjoy. So I'm not skeptical when it comes to that. The other stuff, I've always been skeptical. I'm like, there has to be a reasonable explanation. And I go back to Sherlock Holmes, who said, when you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And so I never really had a paranormal experience like that, but because I just don't think I was ever in the frame of mind
Yeah.
for that. My daughter loves a good jump scare. Oh my goodness. She will watch movies that would keep me up for 10 days straight. And she'll just watch it and then go to bed, Justin. She'll just go to sleep. I don't know how people do that.
See, I'm a horror movie fan, but things do fuck with me, and I can't just go straight to sleep.
You know what? That's good. That gives me hope.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Yeah, you can love a good horror genre and still be like, man, that freaked me out.
Yeah, exactly. It happens. And that's how you know it was a good one.
Right?
So, Larry, just to put a bow on this thing here, man, what's on the horizon that you can share without getting in trouble?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Okay, here's one I can tell you. Actually, can I do that? He probably wouldn't want me to do that. All right, I got to keep that. That's under wraps. I am currently working on I'm executive producing a documentary film. I am not at liberty to say what it's about. However, I can say that if you paid attention over the last half an hour to the subject matter, you might have some idea what it's about. I'm working on several current anime projects, and I'm going to be in Portland, Maine at the Pine State Expo, April 18th, 19th, and 20th. I'm pretty excited about that one because I've never been to Portland, Maine before. And also, Billy West is going to be there, and he's kind of a hero of mine, and I've never had a chance to meet him. So I really hope to. TK was supposed to be there too, Tom Kenny, and he unfortunately had a thing where he had to cancel. So I just found out about that today. But yeah, so I'll be in Portland, Maine, and then yeah, man, I'll keep you updated. But if you or anybody who listens to your podcast wants to follow me, I'm primarily on Instagram. My handle is Outlaw Larry. I didn't pick it. My daughter did it. And so, yeah, so anybody can go on and follow me. I make that particular social media, I make it public. And I do chat with people on there. I love it. I love hearing from people and telling me stories and things like that. So that's what's going on with me.
Awesome. Larry, dude, it's been a pleasure. Thank you again for giving me some of your time. Had a great time talking to you.
This is great. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show.
Thank you, man. Have a great rest of your night.
All right. You take care, brother.
See you, dude.